Metroid Dread is finally here. After nearly 2 decades of waiting, the mainline Metroid series has finally received a new installment. This release has turned a few heads, to say the least, mine included. Despite having never fully played a Metroid game before, even I found myself interested in the newest release. And while I could hop directly into it, I decided to take this chance to go back and finally experience the series that I've heard about for so long. However, I knew one thing from the start, and that was that there is no way you could get me to play through the original Metroid on NES. It is incredibly difficult for me to enjoy any game from that era, let alone a deliberately non-linear one. Thankfully, the existence of Metroid Zero Mission means that there's practically no reason to revisit the original, aside from historical curiosity. To those unaware, this is a full-on remake of the original game released in 2004, meant to bring the first installment up to the quality standards of the series at the time. I'll get more into the specific changes later, but for now just know that this is still the original Metroid at its core, just heavily polished. And with that said, I'm finally ready to jump into this series. This is Metroid. I love the way this game opens. You're thrusted into the action immediately while simultaneously being given everything you need to know. Metroid does not have a complicated story whatsoever. What you just saw is pretty much the extent of it. Samus returns to her home planet of Zebes to exterminate the dangerous Metroids and Mother Brain. There are no real details on why, although from what I understand that'll mostly be covered in future games. The presentation here is definitely a big part of what distinguishes the series from other Nintendo properties. At the time, Nintendo was best known for putting out lighthearted games like Mario or Zelda, and even today they still are. However, Metroid stands in stark contrast to this, instead providing a dark and atmospheric experience. The aesthetic is much more modern than what the company is usually known for, relying on a lot of sci-fi elements. There's heavy inspiration from H.R. Giger and specifically Alien here, and while nothing ever becomes nearly as grotesque as those, the influence is still felt. I feel like the music in this game strikes the perfect balance between being atmospheric and adventurous. There are more somber and mysterious pieces for sure. I mean, just listen to the title theme. But then again, in that very same track, there's this section. There's a natural sense of fear from exploring the dangerous unknown, but at the same time, it's a fun sci-fi action adventure. It represents the game perfectly, and I think this tonal mix always works. Anyways, onto the actual gameplay, Metroid immediately lets you know what it's all about right from the very beginning. Any side-scrolling game at the time of release would start with the player going right, that's just how things work. However, do that in Metroid and you'll quickly find yourself blocked by this tiny gap. After some exploring, you'll find the Morph Ball, realize that's the key that you need to progress, and move on. This incredibly basic bit of game design right at the beginning is a great precursor for what's to come. The genius of Metroid's progression system is that it directly connects the player's power with the sections of the game that they can access, in a way that doesn't feel forced or unnatural. I already mentioned the incredibly basic example of the Morph Ball, but this concept is stretched throughout the entire game. You'll encounter more and more unknown types of obstacles, keep exploring, find new abilities for Samus, and access new areas of the map. The feeling of overcoming obstacles that you previously had no idea how to tackle is incredibly satisfying, and it never gets old even once. As for Samus herself, she feels really good to control here. Movement starts off very basic, as you don't really have much to work with, but she's still pretty mobile. She can run, jump, crouch, shoot in 8 directions, everything you need to be able to do to stay alive. Once you start unlocking extra abilities, the controls stay the same, but the improved arsenal makes her much more fun to play as. I really started feeling this once I got abilities like the high jump and speed booster. The Metroid formula is a dangerous one, and one that could easily lead to a frustrating and boring game design if not developed carefully. Thankfully, this game handles itself very well. Although quite a bit of the game is retreading old territory, it never grows tiring because of just how many new opportunities there are every time you revisit an area. You're constantly rewarded for going out of your way to seek out these secrets as well, as you'll always be given an upgrade. This could be an extra energy tank, an extra missile tank, or a new ability altogether. And no matter what, they always make you feel stronger and most importantly motivate you to continue seeking out more. However, in addition to the standard upgrades, occasionally you'll run into one of these unknown items. They allow you to get rid of certain blocks in the immediate area, but aside from that, they don't really seem to do much. I'll touch more on these later, but for now, just remember that they exist. One of the really special things about Metroid is how skillful players can completely break the sequence of the game. By utilizing hidden techniques such as wall jumping or shine sparking, you can access certain abilities way earlier than intended, take on boss fights out of order, and just generally break the typical order of events. While this could be seen as fragile game design, it's clear that the developers were completely aware of this potential within the game, and even encourage it. I never did anything like this since it's my first game in the series and I'm not nearly familiar enough with the game to pull something like that off, but this is amazing for fans and it helps replay value tremendously. Across the journey, you'll come across a couple of boss fights, and while there aren't many of them and they're all pretty easy, well, for the most part, they do a great job of making them feel like big milestones. Kraid and Ridley both come as the final challenge in each of their respective layers, and it's so much fun to face enemies that are so big relative to Samus. The music is amazing in this regard too. It really helps drive the intensity of the situation. Also, speaking of Ridley, I was honestly really surprised to see that his role here is so insignificant. He's been built up as a fan-favorite character in the series, even securing a spot as a fighter in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but he's just one more boss fight here. I'm pretty sure this is going to change in later games, but in the original installment, he's not nearly as important as I assumed he would be. Anyways, after dealing with both Kraid and Ridley, this roadblock that you encountered right at the beginning of the game is finally opened up. This is Torian, the final area of the game and home of the titular Metroids. This final area is intense, specifically because of these guys. They home in on you, require more resources to kill than any other enemy in the game, and if they reach you, they rapidly suck away your energy, and can be really difficult to shake off at points. Metroids are terrifying in hordes, and they create a strong sense of dread and fear that really helps sell this final area as one of the highlights of the game for me. Unfortunately, Metroid stumbles right before the end with a genuinely terrible final boss. It's one room with nothing but glass walls to shoot missiles through, tiny platforms, and a ridiculous amount of projectiles to dodge. I swear this fight is designed to be as irritating as possible. It's near impossible to beat without taking damage, and it's not engaging at all. It's a massive difficulty spike as well, and the only time I died in the entire game. It doesn't feel fair like the rest of the game, it's just obnoxious. Thankfully, it is over quickly, and is immediately followed by one of the best and most iconic sequences in the entire game. The final countdown to escape the exploding base is such an electrifying sequence. Up until now, Metroid has encouraged you to take your time exploring every possible inch of the map, but in this final section there is no time for that. As soon as you see the ticking clock in the corner of the screen, you realize exactly what is happening, and you have to get out as quickly as possible. It's such an intense and ultimately satisfying sequence that brings an amazing close to the end of the game and sends it off on a high point. At least that's the case for the original game. Zero Mission is not finished yet. There's one last area here exclusive to the remake, called Chozodia. I praise Torian for being intense, but despite lacking Metroids, Chozodia manages to be even more stressful. Samus is completely stripped of her armor, wielding nothing more than a pathetic stun pistol. Using this, you have to stay hidden in a stealth section traveling through Chozo ruins and the Space Pirate mothership. Samus is extremely fragile in this state, and it only takes a few hits for her to die, so it is especially important that you remain undetected as much as possible. However, it's incredibly easy to get spotted here, and when you do, that means it's time to run for your life. You can shake enemies, but it's extremely difficult. And whenever you're found, the adrenaline kicks in just like it did during the countdown after the Mother Brain fight, and you are sent into a scramble. This entire segment is unbelievably nerve-wracking, and that is a very good thing. Once you reach the end of this section and face a quick mini-boss, you are treated to one of the single most satisfying rewards I have ever seen in a video game: the ability to have your suit back. Not only do you retain every single ability you had before, but those unknown items that were previously incompatible with Samus' suit are now revealed to be the 3 most powerful upgrades in the game: the Plasma Beam, the Varia Suit, and the Space Jump. Now you're practically unstoppable. It is hard to describe with words just how satisfying it is to run back through the previous area fully upgraded, with the triumphant music blaring, absolutely obliterating everything in your path. It's easy to see why this section works so well, putting you through an extremely stressful experience only to let you turn around and destroy it all. Still, the simplicity does not degrade the effectiveness at all. With one final boss fight and another escape sequence, Metroid Zero Mission goes out with a bang. If there is one critique that I have for this final section, it's that it feels somewhat tacked on. Torian and the Mother Brain fight are such a natural conclusion to the game, and this feels more like a DLC chapter than an extension. Still, it's such an incredible sequence that it's hard to care. So, that's the first Metroid game. Aside from the final sequences, it felt pretty basic for the most part, but that's to be expected. This was the game that quite literally created the Metroidvania genre, so it's perfectly natural that it's mostly conceptually driven. The concept that the game is based around is incredibly strong, and it's clear that the team behind it knew that and took advantage of it. Since I played the updated version, of course there were multiple refinements that made it easier to play. For one thing, there's a map system now. This was a lifesaver. I can't even imagine playing the game without it. But there are also restore points that weren't there in the original, methods of movement that weren't possible before, entirely new rooms and areas, and of course the massive epilogue sequence on Chozodia. Zero Mission is a pretty incredible remake, one of the best efforts I've seen to modernize a classic game. I'm really glad that I finally decided to give the series a shot, and I really enjoyed my time with Zero Mission. The core gameplay philosophy is so strong that it carries the whole experience and keeps it consistently engaging. The atmosphere is surprisingly rich, and the incredible and iconic moments towards the end of the game just make the whole experience that much more worthwhile. If you're looking to get into the series as well, I can safely confirm that Zero Mission is a very comfortable place to begin. It's the start of the timeline, so no prior knowledge is expected, it's incredibly beginner-friendly, it's not very difficult at all until the end, and it's really short. It's a very accessible experience, and one that made me really excited to delve into the rest of the series. And from what I've heard, the best is yet to come. Next time, I'll be looking at the next installment in the series, Metroid 2: Return of Samus. I'm really interested to see how the gameplay will evolve, especially considering how my experience with this one will be slightly different from normal. Thank you so much for watching. See you next mission.